Welcome to Relationship Mastery, a podcast for those who want to learn how to master the art of creating happy, healthy, and loving relationships. Please join me, Adey-Jones, and my co-host, Barry Selby, each Tuesday at 1 p.m. Pacific for a lively and informative conversation on everything to do with relationships. Welcome, everybody, and welcome, Barry. Great to see you again.
You too, Del. Glad to be back for another rich and deep conversation.
Yeah, this is we teased this last week. We said this is going to be the bow. It's actually a double bow we're going to give on. First of all, we talked about conscious. Oh gosh, you corrected me last week.
Conscious conflict resolution.
Exactly.
And then we talked about oh, now I blanked.
Apologies. That's why it takes two of us.
Indeed.
Yeah, about authentic apologies, and then this week and next week we're going to split it up into two parts because I think, as we were just saying, it's such a rich topic.
Mm-hmm.
But these next weeks, we're going to be talking about forgiveness, and we're going to break it up. This week we're going to talk about forgiveness of others. If we feel that somebody has done something to hurt us deeply, or if they've violated our boundaries, or they've taken advantage of us, or lied to us and deceived us, and the whole laundry list of things that can have us feeling that we that somebody else has done something to really hurt and upset us, and which brings up the subject of forgiveness. And so what I wanted to start off by saying is that forgiveness, we tend to think simplistically, we think that forgiveness is about, I forgive somebody else. But really, forgiveness of others, if they have violated us or done something, really horrendous to hurt us, it's a gift we give ourselves, 100%. And the other person. If the other person is regretful and sorry and has made amends and things like that, of course we give them the gift as well of saying that we've forgiven them, we understand, and that we're ready to move on. But even if they don't apologize, even if they don't acknowledge what they may have done to us, forgiveness, we still benefit from forgiveness. So really, ultimately, it is about the gift we give ourselves.
Yeah, I want to underscore that because the thing is that when we don't forgive, when we don't make amends, that's entirely of ourselves. We may be unconsciously doing it, but we're carrying around this barrier and this I want to say a wedge between us and somebody else, the other person. So even though they made amends and things are completed up from that side of things, if we don't do this piece of the work, we're not fully engaged anymore. We're still separating from them in some way. So forgiveness is very important for that. The other part, and I want to score this too, because you said it so clearly and really emphasize this, is that forgiveness is the gift we give ourselves. The way I like talking about this in one of my frames, and I've used it many times, is that because people say, forgiveness is God's job, sort of thing. And I say, you know what? The reality is God doesn't forgive. And people are going, God's like, what do you mean God doesn't forgive? All this sort of stuff. I love messing with people when I say that because I wait for a moment. And I said, the reason why God doesn't forgive is because God doesn't judge. We as human beings are the ones that cast judgments and hate and upset. So it's our job, our requirement to balance that action, or I should say, to erase that action, so to speak, by forgiveness. So self-forgiveness we'll talk about next week in a much bigger way. But recognizing that we're talking about forgiving other people, it is an inside job. It does start with us.
Yeah, and again, also what you just said there is, the block doesn't even just happen if we. I mean, what's the old Buddhist thing of, if we have a burning rock in our hands of anger, say it's anger, we think that if we throw it at somebody that they're going to get hurt. But the only person that's got hurt is the person that's holding that burning rock of anger. And hanging on to it burns even further. We don't have to throw it at people, but we can let it go. And what you just said about it holding on to that anger doesn't just separate you from the other person, separates you from yourself, from living in the present moment, from moving on with your life. It liberates you. So it's such a gift to give to ourselves now. And I also just want to clarify, and we talked about this just before we started the show, Barry, that there are sort of small injustices and there are huge
Heinous ones. Yes,
injustices. And,
absolutely.
as a mother, I was just saying that, it's, we were talking about, so sometimes we can look at ourselves as, again, as Barry said, we're talking about this next week about having judgments. But some things happen that you really, it can fall into a category of good and bad. And I try not to use the word good and bad, but take murder, for instance. If somebody was to murder my child, I could not just say, well, I forgive myself for judging that they did something wrong. No,
Right.
I'm sorry. Taking somebody else's life is, in my book, something that we just do not do. It is bad. I'll use the word bad. It is very, very bad. Raping somebody is very, very bad. So we're
Yeah.
not saying that every violation or crime should be forgiven. But what we are saying is, there's a difference between understand or not forgiving the action, not condoning the action, I should say, not saying that action was okay, but understanding that often people behave in ways that are very harmful to other people,
Hmm.
that we don't understand why. We don't understand what their thinking was in that moment, what their life experience was in that moment. We don't know what led them to that. That's the part that we don't understand. And when we can give, I don't usually use the word grace, but for some reason grace is coming up for me to say, but when we acknowledge that we really don't know the bigger picture. We don't know, either in this lifetime or lifetimes or whatever it is, what would lead that person to act in that way. We can let go a little easier of that judgment of they are a terrible person for having done that terrible thing. We can just say that was a terrible thing. Again, as with the least amount of judgment as possible, because sometimes some things that look terrible aren't terrible, and that's a whole other show. But what I'm
Yes.
trying to say is that things that generally look terrible to us, we can not condone that action, but we also don't have to condemn the person that did it, because there's so much that we don't know as human beings. We haven't walked in somebody else's shoes. We don't know what their life was like. We haven't a clue what was going through their mind at that moment. So hope that
So
clarifies some of the confusion out there for some people.
adding some more content to the conversation, because something else came up for me as well, is that there is this presumption or even teaching, I think maybe some form of religious teaching. I'm not trained in the areas to be able to say exactly, but I've heard the phrase thrown around like, you forgive and forget. That you
Yeah.
forgive and you forgive and let go. Forgiveness is not a memory wipe.
Hmm.
Forgiveness is a removal of the sharp edges of pain inside we carry around something that happened. Because the thing is, like you were saying, in traumatic situations, whether it's rape or some sort of pain infliction, that they've made amends, or maybe they haven't. But the truth is, the forgiveness piece, which again, we'll talk about more detail about the self part next week. But the truth is, the forgiveness, like you're saying with that burning rock, is that we're carrying that hurt inside ourselves that isn't oftentimes even affecting the other person. The other person's oblivious to what we're feeling. So to have forgiveness, to forgive somebody else, it's not actually forgiving them, it's actually forgiving ourselves for the weight of pain we're carrying inside ourselves for what they did to us, or whatever they did out in the world. So it's not about forgiving and forgetting, it's forgiving and being free. And this is the thing, it's so much about the freedom in this part, because forgiveness is the last piece of the puzzle we talked about again in previous weeks about conflict resolution and apologies. But to be able to forgive is kind of like, as I said, the bow on the top of the cake, as we said last week. But is that it is the piece that says, and now I'm free. That's kind of the feeling about it. So forgiveness is such a key component. We want to make sure, as we've said so much so in this episode, hope you get this point that when you do forgive, you get freedom out of it.
Yeah, 100%. And you can, when we're holding on to that anger, judgment, resentment, what pain, whatever we want to call it,
Hmm.
we're not talking about a spiritual bypass here. We're not rushing the process at all. There is a mourning period. There's an anger that needs to be felt and released if you've been violated. There's so much that you need to be, okay with feeling. Let that energy move through you. Feel those feelings. Know that you have every right to feel the way you do. but
Yeah.
knowing at some point there is a choice point. There is a choice point where you, when you continue to keep going into the past and ruminating and restirring an old wound and picking at it, that you are actually sort of perpetuating the pain. You
Hmm.
are, yes, there was, something happened. You suffered at the hands of somebody else, to some degree or another. Like I said, we can be talking about the most minor thing to the most egregious thing, but
Right.
somebody else's actions did harm you, hurt you. 100% feel it, honor it, own it, and allow yourself to process it. But also know at some point that there is a choice point, free will, where you can actually say, I refuse to hand over my power to this other person, especially if they haven't acknowledged the hurt they've caused. Because basically, you're handing your power over to them then. You're letting their past behavior or inaction determine your quality of life. And at some point, you have to realize that that's now yours to let go of. It's within your power. It's not within their power at all. Even if they were to say sorry or not say sorry, it's not in
Hmm.
their power. They could say sorry and you could still refuse to accept that apology and still be in pain. Or they could say sorry and you could choose to accept it and lessen the pain, but it's still up to you how you respond. So that's, I think, what we are pointing to is the liberation, the freedom to regain your life, lead your life as you would choose to lead it, not in response to something that's happened to you.
Hmm.
And also, gosh, I'm having one of those moments where my mind just blanks. So I'll shut up for now, Barry, and you jump in. It will come back to me.
Well, I'm going to detail slightly on this because I know we keep talking about this so we're going to talk mechanics of it as well, just another steps to take through it. But the thing about it, and I want to come back to this point that I said earlier, is that this thing about carrying around that weight inside, like you're saying, that burning rock, you open the other person's going to die, and you don't throw it, and you carry on that, you burn yourself. This is actually part of the codependent conversation we talked about way back at the beginning of our series of talks. Is that we have this expectation by doing forgiveness, the other person will change, and that expectation is a codependent model because it means that we don't get happiness till they change. It's like, no, forgiveness is a totally internal work that allows us to disengage from that person so we're no longer in some sort of codependent enmeshment with how they feel, how they respond, how they act. And we get to be free, as I said earlier, total freedom, independent of that. And so this forgiveness work is is a interdependent, for want of a better word, way of interacting with the world, interacting with other people, and also interacting with yourself. So I want to make sure people get. I'm going to be adamant about this. You've got to get this point clearly. Forgiveness is not something you do for other people; you do it for yourself, even
Yeah.
though it's involved with other people.
Yeah, I want to go a little deeper into that one actually, Barry,
Hmm.
because I think that, when I was talking about sort of forgiving somebody for something sort of egregious, I'm thinking about somebody that might even not be in your life anymore. It might
Yeah.
even be the way you were raised as a child. It might have been a horrendous violation that one of your parents perpetrated on you, and they may be dead now, or it might be an ex that cheated on you, or whatever
Hmm.
it is. So that's why I say it's not dependent on the other person being sorry. Your ability to forgive and move on. It's not forgive and forget, because we learn from everything that happened to us in life. But to
Indeed.
forgive and move on, to live in the present moment, to not be a prisoner of the past, to be, have sovereignty over your own life, how you want to live your life this point forward, not defined by somebody else's actions or an event that happened in your life. But I also think that when you are in a relationship and as a couple, and it's not like even with siblings, you can sort of like part ways a bit and have a bit of distance. But when you are in a relationship with somebody and you are living under the same roof and you are in relationship together, I don't want to dismiss the. I do think when you live together, it's important. It's more important that the other person, does acknowledge that they have hurt you,
Yeah.
Because it's what I'm trying to say is I don't want people to think, oh God, so my partner did this thing, and we'll use the cheating analogy for a second, like they cheat, I caught them cheating, and they haven't owned it. They've said they did it because there's this wrong with me. I drove them to it, or I did this, but I forgive them anyway. We're not talking about
No.
that. That's what I
Right.
just want to make clear here. We are not saying, you know, um, whether your partner acknowledges that they may have done something that was incredibly hurtful or painful to the relationship, that you just blindly just forgive and keep putting your head in the sand, and so we're not talking about that.
No. In fact, with forgiveness, even though so it's like the icing on the cake, it's the bow on top of the pie. Not pie. On top. Must be thinking of food today. Is the thing about having forgiveness is that there is a next step afterwards, oftentimes. And the thing is, for example, in the case you're using about your partner cheated on you, especially if they're using you as the reason why they cheated, there's a whole other story about relationship counseling you need to go to and get therapy and probably break up. Is that after the forgiveness, what it means is that how you interact with that person. For example, if you have someone, for example, your partner cheated on you, and they are acting like it doesn't make a difference, you can either come at them from the place of upset, rage, and fury, and basically just kick them out and be upset and carry this toxic system inside yourself. Or with the forgiveness work, you become clear about it and you can simply work with them to let them leave without all the hooks involved and all the attachments and all the upsets. You can be very clean and very solid about it. So the same result can happen, but the feeling you have afterwards is clarity and comfort, and you feel comfortable.
Yeah.
So you get that understanding.
Yeah, and I love what you just said, Barry, because it really brings us into the next point I wanted to make, which is somebody else's actions. I know this is a big sweeping statement, but it
Hmm.
really does have nothing to do with you. So
Yeah.
say if somebody violates you or does something to, we'll just keep on the same cheating metaphor for right now. But if somebody does do that, it's not, it's so much easier to forgive when we understand that it's not personal. It
Mm.
wasn't an attack on us. Something happened in that person's mind that had them act on that behavior. And they can justify it as much as they want. They can say, well, you weren't this way, or I didn't get enough attention, or whatever it is they might say. But the bottom line is, if we are so steady in ourselves that we know that it is never personal, how somebody else behaves is to do with the world that they live in. Often it's actually, especially when they do some stuff that's reactive or painful or selfish or hurtful, they're usually coming from a very young part of themselves, something that's happened in their life in the first 10 years or so, where they're being reactive. So it
Yeah.
couldn't have had anything to do with you because you didn't even know them then. So
Right.
when we can have that distance between ourselves and the person that has violated our trust or hurt us in some way, that space gives us more room to have forgiveness, to have understanding, to have compassion, to be able to say, hey, I haven't a clue what you went through, but boy, you've got some really interesting thinking that you would think that it would be okay to do this to another human being. You
Right.
you think in a way that is harmful not only to me but to yourself and to other people. So I need to distance myself from you, unless of course they acknowledge it and they say, "Oh my God, I did something terrible. I have to get to the root of this. I'm going to seek therapy. I'm so sorry. This will never happen again." That's where there's chance for the relationship to heal. But as I said, if they're not, that distance will help you let go. It will help you let go of, like, this has nothing to do with me. It's not my job. It's not my responsibility. I didn't cause it and I can't cure it and I can't fix them. I need to distance myself from an unhealthy person,
Mhm.
but with love and forgiveness. It doesn't have to be with anger, because anger will keep that attachment there.
Exactly. In fact, there's almost the implication by saying this that by doing forgiveness, you're being the bigger person, so to speak.
Mm-hmm.
But the truth is, you are, because you're being more aware, more conscious, more self-supportive. And it's not about like again, turning the other cheek type thing. It's not like that premise of like, turning the other cheek and take it again. It's like, no, you don't forgive and forget. You forgive and move forward. The other part is that this journey that you're going through that's happening, in some ways, you could almost be thankful that you now see that something that the wound they've been carrying for all their lives is now showing up now versus 10 years down the road, for example. So in some ways, you, again, with the forgiveness and with the understanding that you now see things more clearly, you might even see that person from a lens of going, oh, now I see what's going on. And it's not to do with me. Yes, I happen to be the one in the gun sight, so to speak, when they were acting out. But it's nothing to do with me. It could have been anybody. I happen to be me in this point. But the good news is, and this is one of the challenges to move into good news, is that what happened is something they carry from childhood, and I'm not part of this anymore. I can be free of this. So the choice you make after the doing forgiveness work is where the real work can be played out, because you start to see what choice you're making from that point forward, where you are more centered and more able to make clear decisions versus reactive decisions. So this is important work.
It really is, and I'm already 2 shows ahead now because
We do this.
we always do this. But as we said, next week we're going to be talking about self-forgiveness, which is a huge
Mhm.
part of this, forgiveness topic here. But we're touching on something else here right now of when something has happened that has hurt us very deeply.
Mhm.
That's another show, because
Yes.
that is something that, again, that's going to be the bow on top of the bow on top of the bow, because we're going to talk about the gifts of being hurt. But right
Yeah.
now, we're just going to stay where we are.
You don't think about that yet. That's further down the road.
Let's further down the road here. But yeah, back to what we were talking about. There's
Mhm.
the gifts of forgiving somebody. It's I made a little list here. Just it gives us the opportunity to. It not only frees ourselves up, but especially when somebody else is really, really suffering from what they did. They
Mhm.
really own that what they did was wrong and hurtful, or whatever they were going through at the time, but they really own it. When we can be humble enough to recognize that they're just human, just like us, and that we equally so could make a mistake like that or
Yeah.
take an action like that, it gives us an opportunity to heal, not only to help them heal, but for us to heal at a really deep, deep level too. Because often we can, as what's that old saying, the sort of, God, I'm so bad. I went to Catholic school. You think I'd remember? But it was like, oh, don't throw stones. People in glass houses shouldn't throw stones. That's the thing.
Right.
So, the throwing the stone is the judgment. But as I said, some violations are so horrendous that it's not we're not going to blame ourselves for it. But all I'm saying is we are all human. We all are vulnerable at times in our lives to make mistakes. We all do things that we can all look back on, things that we regret and wish we could do a do over, as I like to say.
Right.
But so when we see the humanity in another person, and we see their there's my snow globe again. I love this. That represents a little bubble, is our head bubble. It's where we live in this world of thought. That
Mhm.
stories, justifications, why we can do certain things, why we're entitled to be selfish or hurt another person. That's all going on inside our little human head bubble there that we live in. That separate reality, as I say. But knowing that underneath it all, we're all these beautiful spiritual beings, all coming from the same source. And we call that the psychological innocence. The psychology is that head bubble we live in with all that thinking and our human thoughts and the way we react to things. But beneath that, there is the psychological innocence. There is that spiritual essence that we all share. And if we can meet each other in that place, I'm going to use an example. Actually, let me see how much I can share here without revealing too much. Okay, so I studied with Debbie Ford many, many years ago, and
Mhm.
it was I did a couple of different trainings with her. One was blueprint training, and the other one was spiritual divorce and things like that. And I had just found out that my partner was had been cheating, and it was very, very, very painful for me. And one of my first clients was going to be a male who was a serial cheater. And I
Hmm.
remember saying, because what we all did is we all brought a partner in and said we would cross in the coach training. Like I would bring somebody in and say, okay, so, somebody else can coach my friend. So somebody brought this man in and said, well, he's a serial cheater, and who would like to, I was chosen to work with him. And I was like, no, I can't do that. No, no, I'm
Right.
too raw right now. I'm too vulnerable. There's no way I'm going to be a good coach for this guy. But it was so divinely orchestrated. It was so incredible. And even though I had been wounded in this way, very badly wounded in this way, because it was over a series of years, I was able, it was such a gift. I was put in a position of coaching this man. And over the course of 14 weeks, we had to coach 14 weeks with him. And I genuinely, genuinely cared about this man. I saw his loving essence. I saw his innocence. I saw how his thinking had him behave the way he did and justify the way he did. And he was also actually incredibly contrite. He really, really owned the damage that he caused his relationships. But I'm just saying that, and I found myself in that situation often when we were in USM, when we would do our trios. I'd be working with somebody that had done something that I had experienced maybe as a child that was like, I can never work with this person. How can I sit opposite him and see his loving essence when he's, violated a child or raped a woman or something like this? And believe it or not, I was actually able to still put the story aside and my experience aside and still see underneath it that there was a beautiful spiritual being who was very hurt and wounded in this lifetime and acting out in ways that, as they say, hurt people hurt people.
Hmm.
So,
The thing about that is there's almost a gift in the sense that you're getting the awareness of what that experience was like, but from a different person. So you're not invested in the person so much. There can be a shift there. And one of the gifts of this, because the challenge is when somebody we love, that we're close to, we're intimate with, does something so heinous, we've got those two meshed together. They're hooked in, they're pulled in together, so we can't separate them.
yeah.
And so forgive that person, like, not so easy.
Yeah.
But when you have somebody that you don't know who has done the same behavior, then it's like one of the two, they've separated them out a bit more. So there's a certain level of spaciousness to be able to work with that piece. And so that way you can then go back to the original relationship and see that more clearly too, because you start to be able to differentiate the two pieces and realize that the person who it is and what they did, again, the person and the behavior aren't enmeshed. They actually can be separated out. That's
Yeah.
the biggest gift.
Yeah. It's amazing. And we will bring this up again when we do that one about the gifts of being hurt, because I remember saying
Hmm.
to Debbie Ford, I was like, I am the last person on earth that should be working with this person. Find somebody else. And she's like, no, you're the right person to be working with
She knew
this
better.
person.
Yeah, she knew better.
She knew better. And it was an incredible gift for me and for him. So
Hmm.
yeah, so more about that later. But today, I think we are wrap this one up, unless you have some final words on forgiving others, and then next week we'll, as I said, we'll
Yeah, as you said, we will talk about forgiving self next week. And when we get into more some of the mechanics of how to do that, but the thing I want to make sure people get about forgiving others is it is always about your forgiveness of yourself about the other versus forgiving them for what they did and let them get off the hook. Because in many, many cases, that other person that did something has no awareness they did something wrong or doesn't care they did something wrong.
yeah,
So the forgiveness is not to change them, it's to change us, how we see them. And
yeah,
that's the biggest gift we give ourselves.
absolutely. And again, just a reminder, we covered a massive subject here. There are very minor transgressions that somebody could have done, as Barry says, that they haven't a clue they did. They're innocent. I had no idea.
Yes.
And then
Right.
there's the ones on the end of where we talk about, they somebody's murdered or raped or stuff like that. That is pretty much society lets them know that that's not you know kind behavior, considerate behavior, moral behavior, whatever words we want to use. So just understand that we are really covering a massive spectrum here. This is an overview of of forgiveness. So Thank you, everybody. It's been a lovely, great week talking to you, Barry, and can't wait for next week when we do the forgiving of
Definitely
ourselves. That's going to
going
be
to be
good.
deeper and deeper. So stick with us. It's going to be good.
Yeah. All right. Thank you,
All right.
everyone. Have a great week.
See you next time. We trust you enjoyed this episode and invite you to share this with your friends and loved ones. In fact, please subscribe to our Relationship Mastery podcast. That way you'll get each new episode fresh and shiny as soon as it is released. We'd love to hear from you as well. So go ahead and enter your questions and comments at relationshipmastery.show. Take good care. We will connect with you in our next episode of Relationship Mastery.